proved herself a most capable wife, and for the first year, we were very happy. She was not too proud to do a certain amount of housework, and in the evenings, when we went out for a canter, she carried herself like the true princess she was, and I was proud of her. But also, I sometimes caught her falling into pensive moods, and for days on end, she would speak to no one, not even to me. The first time she behaved in this way, I was most worried, but as time went on, I grew to regard her moods as part of that complex nature of a woman, which makes her difficult to understand. The story of Zara came to me in little snatches, from conversations I overheard, from open talk that went on in the town when I was around, and from gossip tactlessly flung into my ears. It appears that she was the second daughter of Kanemi, Prince of the Tuaregs. Kanemi loved her best of all his daughters and betrothed her at an early age to another Tuareg prince, whom she grew up to hate. On the night when the horses came to take her to her husband, Zara disappeared. She was found some weeks later taking refuge in the house of one of her former female servants. Kanemi was very angry about this, since the marriage was no longer possible. It would have increased his political influence. For many days, he thought hard about how best to punish her. As a man who loved fighting, nothing appealed to his imagination more than gambling her away at a game of Shanaki. On the night of this decision, he rode around the town, inviting young men to the contest. Of those others whom Zara had ruined, I did not hear much, nor did I find out anything definite about her beauty being dangerous. Perhaps I was worrying myself unnecessarily, and it had been idle gossip. But it came to my ears in whispers that just before I won her, Zara had developed a great love for a man called Mallam Usman. This man, who posed as the son of an emir, was wealthy and influential, and founder of the sword than he was worth. My friends, who knew him well, advised me to leave the town before he became well again. Is he sick? I asked. Yes, he was wounded on the night of the Chinachi. Wait, what did he look like? The description I heard was rather vague, but it led me to suspect that Malam Usman was no other than my last adversary in the ring, the man who boasted that he had swallowed the medicine against steel, but I couldn't be sure just then. I was in my room one evening, listening to Zarat Goje, when someone shouted greetings at the door, and I came out. It was Malam Usman, and behind him were three mounted men. Their very bearing spelt trouble as their horses stamped impatiently. Usman appeared rather pale by daylight, and a deep knife slash marked on his neck and cheek. "Ho, Ilia," he roared. "Look at this." He put down a bundle from his horse and invited me to examine it. It was the mutilated body of a child. It must have died sometime earlier. "What is the meaning of this?" I asked. How did he die?" Usman exploded. "How did he die? My men, do you hear a question? How did he die? Have I offended you by asking?" "He's playing innocent," Usman told them. I did not follow what he meant. "What have you come to say?" I snapped. "Ilia," said Usman, "you killed this boy, and we have come to take you before the law." If he had shot at me with his gun, I could have not been more surprised. "Killed him?" I gasped. "Yes, what else can it be?" when a man leaves his horse to run all over wild the town. My horse? Show it to me. He made an impatient movement, and a horse was brought before me. It was Wutsia, my favorite horse. Its forelegs were stained with blood. Is that not your horse? He asked. I admitted that it was. This morning, your horse ran through the town, riderless. This boy was on the roadway. Your horse knocked him down and killed him. You ought to take more care of your livestock. Ilia. He turned to the men and said sharply, take him along. They took me and put me in prison. It was unfair, of course. I knew nothing about the whole affair. There was no means of verifying their story, no assurance that I should be giving a hearing. They merely threw me into jail and walked away. My cell was a little room, hottest in Kano, airless, and shared by 20 to 30 other men. The season was at its and smallpox ravaged the town. Every day, a few men died in our cell, only to be replaced by many. The jailers were sometimes too busy to remove the corpse, and then we had dead men for company. Not a very happy situation, I assure you. While I was in prison, important events were happening in the outside world. It was the year 1903, the year of the Kano Rising. You may remember. What caused the rising? The Emir of Kefi and the Magaji of Zaria had come to take refuge at Kano because they were badly wanted by the British. The story went that the British had sent one of their representatives to interview these great rulers. But instead of giving him an audience, the servants of the rulers had seized the white man and murdered him. That was the accepted story. But we knew, in the prison, that the murderer was none other than Mallam. Early one morning, we heard the thunder of big guns, the crash of shells, and the shouts of the inhabitants. There was panic everywhere. Even among us and our jailers were nowhere to be seen. Neglected and without food, we heard no explanation of what was happening until in the afternoon, when a handful of African riflemen came into the prison yard, broke open our barricades, and set us free. When I came out, my limbs were stiff and I was weak. I was so exhausted I was compelled to lie down on the ground until one of the African troops gave me something to drink. Gradually, I regained my strength. My head no longer swam, and my feet trod fairly steadily when I left the prison yard. My first thought was my home. Would Zara still be there? As I walked, I noticed that the town was much altered. There were broken bottles on the walls, piles of thorn bushes blocked the roads. The ditches were deeper, and everybody I met carried a weapon of some sort. One of the houses near my own must have been badly damaged, for the roof was gone, and part of the wall had fallen in. My fears became suddenly overpowering. Was Zara dead? Did she lie beneath a heap of earth, her delicate body mangled by some cruel weight? I got to the house, in a state of the wildest excitement. The door had fallen in, and I had to scale some splintered wood and debris. The goats were running here and there, and the servants had all left except one who followed me, bewildered from one room to another, saying nothing, offering no help, but merely getting in my way. As I came to each room, I called, Zara! No answer. I listened but heard nothing, save the dismal moaning of the wind. Zara! Still no answer, only that terrible wind. I made it for our favorite room. Zara! Then I heard a strange sound. It sounded like the cry of someone in great pain, a person to whom immediate help would mean everything. I burst into the room. Just then, a man turned and drew his sword. There behind lay my Zara, petrified with fear and well nigh fainting. The man was glowering at me, his sword drawn. One glance at those dark eyebrows and I recognized him. Usman, the thief, cheat, highway robber, murderer, the man who had put me in prison out of envy. I was almost mad with rage. With scarcely a thought for my own safety, and forgetting that I was entirely unarmed, I sprang at him. He made a desperate thrust, which I just escaped as I stumbled on a fallen brick. He was well and strong, while I was weak from the starving, carried out under his orders. My efforts were feeble. I knew for certain that my recklessness would have cost me my life. Had Zara not staggered to her feet and seizing a club, brought it down with all her strength on his head. The big Usman sank to his knees, and we both thought he had been killed. I embraced Zara, and we talked hurriedly about what had been happening in my absence. She told me how Usman had been tormenting her ever since I had left the house. Ilia is going to rot away in prison, he had told her. He would never come out of that hole. Follow me, Zara. I'll make you a wealthy woman, wife of a future emir. She had always refused his temptings and on many occasions had told her retainers not to let him in. He had kept away for short periods, presumably. Went on some murderous errands, but during the Kano rising, she suddenly found him in her rooms, telling her that the city had surrendered, that I was dead, and that the most reasonable thing for her to do was to follow him and leave the city before the British came. They were still arguing about this when I entered the house. I looked at Usman where he lay, senseless among the wreckage. Do you know, Zara, that there is a price on this man's head? He is accused of killing an English captain at Kefi. That must have been the reason why he was so anxious to leave the town. As a matter of fact, the British forces have occupied the town, but there is no fighting going on. We can still live here if we choose. What shall we do? Asked Zara. Are you prepared to follow me? Yes, Ibrahim. Where you go, there I go. As we spoke, the fallen Usman groaned. I went and picked up his sword. Zara was behind me as I began to sort out my valuables. My Quran, my chaplet, my talisman. She had little to pack. Her jewels and gold and other feminine ornaments went into a little black box, which she had brought with her from her father's house. Is that all? I asked her. Yes, she smiled. Then I must saddle the horses. We may have to ride all night. Get something we can eat on the way. I'm very hungry. There was only one of my horses left, a black beast, long legged, big chested, and full of stamina. I saddled her and turned to Zara. Then I noticed that Mallam Usman had risen and was now staggering towards her. He was a thing of terror. His hair was shaggy, his arms swayed, and his teeth were bared. In one or two strides, he was beside the terrified Zara and had gripped her. You shall not take her with you, he roared, clasping her tightly to himself. I shall. You shan't. He drew a small knife and, still holding Zara close to him, invited me to face him. How could I? Sword in hand, I stood for a moment confused, while his fiery eyes mocked me. Then Zara kicked and bit at him, and his hold was slackened. He was struggling to regain his hold of her when I made a clean thrust at his ribs. But, valiant that he was, little did I suspect his trap. At precisely the moment when I lunged at him, Usman in a flash clutched Zara and held her as a shield before his own body. The accident happened before I could check myself. She fell right in line with the sword point, and the weapon ran straight through her heart. Usman flung her aside, and his laughter still rings in my ears to this day. As he ran towards the door, he roared with laughter. What did I tell you? Ha ha ha! I said you wouldn't take her. Ibrahim! Ibrahim! Come back! It was Zara's voice. I had already bounded over the fallen body and was catching up with Usman when I heard it. I went back at once. Zara was breathing her last. She had lost a lot of blood and her eyes were pale. She gasped and panted when she tried to speak, and her words were inaudible. Beautiful Zara, beautiful even in death, kneeling beside her. I could not bring myself to believe that this was true, that she was leaving me forever. Zara! She turned her eyes towards me. Zara! Can you hear me now? I shall not rest, for I shall know no peace until I've avenged you. She was still trying to form some words. Her eyes were closed, her lips pale. I, I, Ibra! Ibra! She died, with my uncompleted name on her lips. It was some time later. I sat still by her body, that the servant made a remark which broke through my heart. Our mistress is dead, she said. She was so brave while you were away and prayed for you to return. I looked up. The words chased each other around my brain. Consciousness came back to me, and with a sense of purpose. What was I doing here, kneeling beside the body of a dead woman? I turned to the servant. Here is some money, I said. Call the others and see that your mistress receives a burial fit for the wife of Malamalaji Ibrahim Ilia. I go on my mission. With her package of jewels and gold under my arm and murder in my eyes, I rode into the gathering dusk.